Hello, my friend. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing well. So we finished this one, the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels. It turned out to be a bit of a surprise because I did not feel very good about the first three chapters. I don't recommend those at all. The controversy and then the political situation amongst the early church and the chapter on God the Father, God the Mother, very interesting. Um, but again, I would skip it. I don't recommend it. But I just thought it was interesting that, it touched on a couple of themes that I had studied in the past. So there's that synchronicity again. One of them being the masculine and feminine nature of the description given in Genesis as God makes Adam and declares that he makes him male and female. He made them. I think it's kind of ironic that if the ideologically inclined that prefer to use they them pronouns only knew that that's how the creation occurred, they would probably have a field day. But because the Bible is kryptonite to most left-wing libtards, they stay away from that as far as possible. I use that term by habit because of the frustration in having to be exposed to the ideological left and their discriminatory policies at every turn, their racist policies at every turn. Their whole concept of anti-racism is based on racism. And, I don't even want to address that because it is so detrimental to a person's way of thinking and acting and living that I'm just hoping that slowly or quickly rather gets swept away by more cohesive thought for our communities so that we don't have to deal with such absolute utter nonsense. But as I mentioned, if they had known that Adam was created and the author of Genesis used the terms they, them, it wasn't until eons later, which is like the next verse or so, that Eve was created. If you read what it says that, and she brings that up in the book as well. So I give her credit for that because that's something that's always been a thorn in my mind, that God created them, male and female. He created them. And then later, he creates Eve. How do you reconcile that? She addresses that and tries to reconcile it throws in a couple of theories that are even wilder than the ones that I had. In particular, the one about the multiple arms, but I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna mention that. And then, of course, she also mentions solipsism, which is a theme that is very synchronistic, very, very dear to my heart. But chapter 4 is worth the book alone, chapter 4. And then we get into chapter 6, which in the conclusion, she steps backwards and says that she's a historian. And she does do an excellent job as simply remaining as a historian and not taking sides between the Gnostics and the apostolic or Catholic. However, in chapter 5, in the chapter of Gnosis, self-knowledge as knowledge of God, you cannot help, and throughout the book, in fact, you cannot help to see that she leans heavily on the side of Gnosticism, and it wouldn't receive the accolades that it did. It wouldn't be honored for the book that it is if it didn't denigrate in some way, shape, or form the entire Christian tradition. So there's that. That is the only way that a book would get published in the 20th or 21st century, for that matter, by a major publisher. And so it remains true to that theme, which is rampant in modern literature, that it creates doubt in the mind of the reader. It emphasizes the conflict. It emphasizes the disunity, the disharmony, the one side calling the other side heretics and apostates, and on and on. And so even though she remains relatively unbiased, I have to admit throughout the book she does stay on the sideline for the most part and maintains her role as strictly a historian. So I have to give her credit for that, and did a very commendable job. So if you do happen to see this book, chapter 4 is a home run. Don't touch any of the rest because it's just a bit of a torture. However, this is the one I was telling you about right here, right? The early Christian writings. This dovetails into this perfectly. And this is valuable. Every word of this is valuable to read. Why? Because it was probably published before the modern day persecution of Christians that we're living through right now in the publishing industry. This was published, the Penguin Classics, 1944 to 1964. Editors. These are the editors. The guy that edited it passed away in 1972. So if you can find books that are older, see, this was first published in 1968. So anything older than, 1970, 1980, once you get past that date, you're not going to find anything like this published, because everything published today is anti-Christian at its core. So this is extremely valuable. Don't lose this. This book will eventually be illegal. It'll eventually be banned by the ideological left. They will not allow anything like this because it's not anti-Christian. It simply transcribes the early Christian writings, and it is pure gold. This is valuable to any Christian. This book right here. This book, you can just read chapter 4 and then throw it out, right? This is gold, the whole thing. But these two go together really well, okay? So that's that. Now, the reason why I wanted to just as a summary, I also wanted to let you know the next book that I'm going to be reading, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy, but this is one I picked up at the thrift store. It's called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ by Levi. Just to give you a little story on this, like, why would I bother reading such a thing? Because in case somebody went to the trouble to publish this, it's a pretty thick book. This guy, who was some country preacher, born in 1844, so around the turn of the century, he was an army chaplain from Ohio, and sounds like he was quite the little cult leader out there in some little Disciples of Christ church. Good for him. But his idea was that he felt that anything that happened in history was embedded in the ether, right? And that if you could access the ether through meditation, he called it the Akashic record. The Akashic record, he could go in there and see exactly everything that happened in the New Testament times as if he was an eyewitness to history, and then he transcribed what he found. And it is, it's written in the same way that the Gospels are written, like chapter and verse. Can you imagine the amount of effort that went into writing this? Each section, each chapter, every verse is, this would have taken years to put down with notes and everything at the beginning of pretty much every chapter by the looks of it. And every single verse is, numbered. Every I don't know if you can see that, but the format is the same as a typical, Bible, with every verse numbered. So somebody went to the trouble of writing that out. But why would I waste my time on something that is based on a foundation that is absolutely absurd. There is no way to prove that you can go through some meditation, go into a trance, and access the Akashic record, the history of all humanity, and then travel through time and then observe. And it's why would I waste my time doing that? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that if somebody happens to have read this, I'd like to be able to know what they're talking about so I could relate to that person. That's one reason. If they say to me, oh, I follow the Aquarian gospel, then I can know what they're talking about and not think that they're crazy. And secondly, is that if the guy went to that much trouble, it looks like it was published around the originally published probably around the 1920s by the looks of it on the back of the book. This one says the first printing in 1972. But originally it would have been written in prior to 1920 for sure. Probably around the late 1800s or early 1900s. So his original name, Levi H. Dowling was his name. He was born in 1844. He's the guy credited with writing this, right? And he goes by the name Levi. So we're going to try and dig into this. It's not a short read by any means, but I don't think I'll make any videos on it. I just want to read it for the sake of having an awareness of it. I don't think there's anything worth sharing because we already have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We don't need another one. Okay? So there's that. I don't know if that's a good decision or not, but I'm going to be trying to get through that. So yeah, we're finished that one. And that book by Elaine Pagels really did knock the crap out of me. Threw me for a bit of a loop. So I'm going to have to recuperate from that. I might take a little bit of a break for a while. But however you're doing, I hope you're doing great. And I thank you very much for being patient with me and bearing through these long, boring videos. But if there's something in there that can encourage you, I hope it does. To see an explanation, an exposition on the history of these two different competing groups in the early church, who had significant characters on either side, but of course much more significant characters on the side of the apostolic succession, that eventually formed the Catholic Church. And it's no wonder, because once the Catholic Church gained power and strength, they would have burned any books that they considered heretical, that were such as the Gospel of Thomas, for example. But there's so many of these individual writings, I may have to go back and double check on some of them. And again, the whole Nag Hammadi discovery, I'd like to see more well documented historically on that, because who knows? Some guy finds a clay pot. It's a little bit sketchy. It's not as well documented as the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, is what I'm trying to say. But be that as it may, we have these ancient papyrus, however ancient they are, and they are in museums, and you can, look at them and so on and so forth. So we'll leave it at that. But yeah, just to see the history is very, very interesting. I think it can be helpful, and it helps to understand that Christianity is a solipsistic, if that is such a word, type of religion. Is a religion based on individual. It is unique to each person. It is not a large organization. See, the Catholic Church says, unless you're part of the Catholic Church, there's no salvation outside of the Catholic Church. That's a famous phrase that they've used. They said, unless you're part of the Catholic Church, you're not part of it. Well, Catholic just means universal, right? But the fundamentals of Christian teaching, the fundamental directives of Christ, can be found in the last chapter of John as well as the last chapter of Revelation. They both parallel each other. And the message that they give is, don't worry about the other person. You follow me. You know, the last chapter of Revelation is, or second last chapter, let the one who is holy still keep himself holy. Let the one who is unholy still keep himself holy. And behold, I'm coming quickly. My reward is with me to give every man as he deserves, right? To give every person as they deserve. It's based on the individual. It's not what group you belong to. It's not what denomination you belong to. The last chapter of Revelation says, just let the person who's doing, live and let live, let them do their own thing. You follow me and know that you will receive a just reward, exactly what you deserve. Whatever you sow, you're going to reap. And the good news of the gospel is that God can forgive so that we don't reap what we deserve. He provides an abundant blessing over and above what we deserve. And again, the last chapter of John where it says, don't worry about what this guy's going to do. If I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? That's what he said to Peter when he appeared to him, you know. He said, you follow me, you feed my sheep. Don't worry about what this other person is doing. That's exactly what he told him. The last instructions that he gave to him. The last instructions weren't, okay, you guys now all get together, make this church, fight against the Romans, survive, get scattered. No, he didn't do that at all. All he said was, you focus on me, you follow me, feed my sheep whenever you can, and don't worry about the other guy. This is the prime directive. The Christian church today says that they have this great commission that they pull out of context, and they use that to support their missionary efforts. And God bless them for that. That's wonderful. That's great. That's good. But I'm looking at the final instructions of those two books, and I'm just telling it as it is. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to counter that great commission that they have. Like I said, that's great. I'm glad they have a great commission, and I'm happy for it. I'm happy for those people that have been called. Otherwise, the work wouldn't get done. Just because this part of the body is different from that part of the body, just because the Gnostics believe this and the Apostolics believe that, I'm not going to try and say that either one of them was outside of God's mercy. We can see that retrospectively now by looking back in history, whereas at the time they couldn't see it. They were fighting each other doctrinally and calling the other person heretic, calling the other person apostate, when they were both trying their best to love God and serve their fellow human beings to the best of their ability and to understand Christ to the best of their ability with the information they had available at that time. They didn't have everything all collated after 1611 as we did today. We've got Bibles all over the place, and we've got so many different references and commentaries and concordances and all that kind of stuff that we have at our disposal. They didn't have that. And so they did the best they could, and they followed those instructions, right? They tried to serve as best they could. So now looking back, we can say, yeah, there was no reason for them to condemn one another. They didn't condemn one another, but they certainly weren't friendly towards one another. And they used condemning language, saying that you guys aren't part of the true Christian church. And the other guys were saying the same thing. You're not part of the true Christian church. And it existed today. You talk to anybody for 5 minutes and eventually they're going to say, oh, you're not a real Christian, right? You're not really saved. This is a favorite saying of any evangelical today. 99% of evangelical churches, you walk in there, and if you know absolutely nothing about Christianity, they'll welcome you with open arms. But if you have any background in Christian thought at all, they will wait, and they will wait for the opportunity and say, oh, you're not really saved. You're not a real Christian, right? We're the real Christians here. Those other Christians out there, they're heretics. They're apostate. It's so common. You see it all the time. So enough about that, because again, I'm going to start sounding like the Gnostics, or I'm going to start sounding like the Apostolic Succession. I don't want to be in either group. I want to love God, love Jesus, and love you for watching this video. Okay? I'm sorry. I got to go. God bless you. I love you very much. Have yourself a fantastic day. God loves you. Take care of yourself, okay? Be good.